money was everywhere. You could walk into a startup and you could get a Porsche as a sign-up bonus.
Why did you want to build a consequential company?
You're in survival mode. You think you're going to die tomorrow. How do you take this as an opportunity to do better?
You can't build a consequential company with empty stomach.
We are hungry. We want to build CLM for Microsoft. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs built consequential companies because that hunger was there.
Could you give some insights on how this journey was for you?
One of the things I got introduced to was computers. PCs had just come in. They were very expensive. Average salaries were probably 3,000 rupees. So I learned programming the hard way.
If you have to predict future 10 years down the line,
You took something that was working in the US and you replicated it here and became successful.
how can I have that understanding of the US market being based out of in India?
So the Satya Nadellas, Sundar Pichais and the Shantanus of the world and the Lakshmans of the world, they are all going to be in India, building in India. No technology can match that kind of power.
When AI use cases or applications of AI will become pervasive, how do you think the human behavior would change?
I don't think AI is going to be bad for humanity. Everybody will become more creative.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Shivang and we are part of the 01 Network by Zerodha. Together, we intend to bring you insights from the top thinkers in the field of entrepreneurship, technology and investing.
Greetings everyone. Today we are in this beautiful city of Pune and we are hosting a man who is building his 7th startup called Icertis. It's valued close to $5 billion, $250 million in ARR, hires more close to 3,000 folks and no one is talking about this. And today we are joined by my senior and very close friend Apradip, who is having an interesting background of sciences, liberal arts, technology, and law. Let's get straight into this, sir. Thanks a ton. Finally, this is happening. I'm really grateful for this.
No, thank you for being here and I hope you're enjoying the setting and the weather.
Yes.
I'm glad about that.
Contract lifecycle management. That's the company, Icertis. First, I want to understand Icertis ka matlab kya hota hai? We want to hear from the horse's mouth. What does contract lifecycle management is? What does the company do?
So Icertis, let me come to the name first. We went back and forth, but we came up with a very nice word, I must say. Icertis means I certify. Certis is certify, and then Icertis is I stand behind my work. That's how we started. When we started, we had no idea we would get into contract lifecycle management. In fact, when I remember about 3 years into our journey of Icertis, we're doing many other things, not CLM. And Samir called me once and he said, hey, I'm talking to an ex-colleague of mine who works in Microsoft. And he has this, he said, what are you folks doing? And, he's very interested if we want to build CLM for Microsoft. And I said, I was really excited. I said, oh, wow, yeah, we definitely do. I know all about it. And he said, how come? I said, my last company was acquired by BMC and we did a lot of cloud lifecycle management. Okay. And he started laughing. And he said, it was not CLM, it's cloud lifecycle management. It's actually contract lifecycle management. So what do we do? It's an interesting question. So think about a business, right? Every dollar in and out, every rupee in and out, every euro in and out of the company, that transaction does not happen unless there is a contract behind it. There's always a contract, right? Whether you're leasing, selling, buying, hiring, right? Anything that you do look at supply chain, you look at compliance, everything that you do. The foundation of commerce is actually a contract. What is interesting about it is large companies have never really for decades, actually thought about contracts as first-class objects in the enterprise. What we do as Icertis is get that object in the enterprise workflow. Now, what does that mean? You look at a large company like Microsoft, you look at a large company like Johnson & Johnson, like Mercedes-Benz. When they run their contracts, they probably do 100,000 contracts a year. They probably represent 10, 15, 80, $20 billion of buying or selling. And all of this information about how they sell and what they buy is in the contracts. Now they want a software that will actually manage this, not just manage it, but actually get intelligence out of it so they can take good decisions, right? So think about Mercedes trying to build a car. It'll need steering wheels, it'll need brake pads, it'll need headlights. It'll need probably about 35,000 parts, right? Think about all of these parts having somewhere an entry in a contract which says, hey, I want to buy 50,000 screws or 5 million screws more likely, and 50,000 headlights and 50,000 steering wheels. And I want to buy them over the next 5 years because I think that is how long this model is going to last. And of course, the after sales and afterlife and so on. So now when you want to negotiate, how do you start? Hey, it's very interesting. You have to model how many cars you're going to build, your profit margins, how much each part will give you in terms of that leverage to your profit margins, their bottom line, how your customers are going to accept it, what quality you need to intend. If you buy a screw, you can buy the same specification screw, at least the, kind of the size of the screw, etc., at let's say a conceptually 1 rupee and 10,000 rupees. Because you could have a screw that would survive 3,000 years or 300 years, and you could buy a screw that would last for a year or designed to last for a year. This would be much cheaper. So now you have to put all of this together in the contract to make sure you get the right quality at the right time, at the right price. And we help manage large companies manage these contracts and this process and this business flow.
This is very interesting.
Yeah, so a very interesting journey that you have, because you have went from, like you mentioned, from technology. Now you're doing something which has traditionally been in the domain of lawyers, because contract, as we know, we envision these lengthy contracts with so many, words and all of these legalese language.
Right.
So how has your journey been, coming from a field of technology to, managing something, building a behemoth like, Icertis in the field of contract, like mentioned, because the learning curve, I'm sure, would have been quite big. So could you give some insights on how this journey was for you?
Yeah. So very interesting that, both obviously.
So, sorry, can you give us through the perspective of, you studied mechanical engineering, BTech, and then Florida mechanical. So how was the transition between mechanical engineering to, to the world of
software technology, and then to CLM?
Then to CLM. And also in terms of coming back to India, and actually you were in US in the valley while the .com boom was happening.
Yeah.
Give us all perspective.
Let me start with a little bit of philosophy. You solve a problem as an engineer, right? That's what you do, right? So when you're solving a problem, there are 3 aspects to the problem. One aspect is understanding the problem. The second aspect is connecting to the users of the solution, and then actually solving for it and deploying it and making sure that it works and so on and so forth. And an engineer has to be good at all 3. What fascinated me when I was doing my mechanical engineering was my dad actually had a manufacturing unit. So I used to be there all the time. I worked on lathe machines and drilling machines, and I used to love doing things with my hands. But when it came to actually learning mechanical engineering and actually going to details, the theory and background, I really took to it. But when I was doing my engineering, I also got fascinated by, hey, when I actually build these solutions, what does happen in the background? How can I make it more efficient? One of the things I got introduced to was computers. And that world was very different when I was doing my bachelor's in Pune. PCs had just come in. They were very expensive. So imagine like 2 lakh rupees when average salaries were probably 3,000 rupees, right? So I remember still in college, especially in College of Engineering, Pune, where I had some friends, they used to take the PC, the whole PC with the CPU and the big monitors, like huge monitors, and put them in a cupboard and lock it every day. That was the day, and there's no, I'm not making this up. This really happened. And then in our college, they got like 20 of these PCs, and we had access even when we were mechanical engineers. And it was like a revelation to me, saying that, hey, if I can actually model this, a lot of the work that I do on the ground can be eliminated. That's how I got interested in computers. So at that time, though we had access to PCs, some of the assignments, the more difficult problems could not be solved on PCs very easily because the tools were not there. So we used to go to Pune University, which is called Pune University of Pune, then now it's Savitribai Phule University. But they had a mainframe. And have you heard of punched cards?
I haven't.
A brief interaction in school time. That's
Right?
about it.
So punched cards is a card where you take a punching machine and you actually type a program on it, and it punches holes in the card. That's how the card reader reads the program. Okay, and we used to program with punched cards. So, and we used to use Fortran. So imagine you wrote let's say a 500-line program, which each line represents one card. Even your comment represents one card. So it's a paper card, and you create a deck, you put a rubber band around it, then you give it to the operator runs the program, then gives you a printout, then you look at the printout, it also has debugging information, then you see whether it's run properly. If you're lucky, you can find the line where the problem is, otherwise you have to go through the whole program again. Then you can take that one card and punch it again. You can't use the same card, you can use a different card, punch it again, then you submit the program again and you get it. So you can't afford to debug because the cycle was like 12 hours in terms of submitting the program, getting it to run. So I learned programming the hard way. Right? Then I said, man, this is really, really interesting. Then I went to the US for my master's, and it was all transformative because we had like a mainframe at our disposal. We could run the program ourselves. We didn't have punch cards. We actually had terminals where we could type. So the responses were immediate and they were very powerful. You could actually run a CFD, computational fluid dynamics program, which ran for 48 hours and be in full control. And that's how my journey into programming started. So even though I was learning mechanical engineering, I was combining it with a lot of software. So I started with Fortran and assembler, and then I got into more C and C++ and so on and so forth. When I came back, because I decided, I don't want to live in the US for whatever reasons, I came back.
And everybody was against it?
No, not at all. I think it was very interesting. When I came back, I got a computer with me. People used to come home to just see what 20 megabytes of disk would do. Right? And I've had so many questions. People ask me, what are you going to do with I had 2 disks in the computer, so 40 megabytes. I said, what are you going to do this your entire life? You're not going to be able to utilize 40 megabytes. Now you take one picture on the iPhone, it's more than that. So it was funny. But when I came back, it was interesting. I worked in the Automotive Research Association of India because it was fascinating. I love cars. I love mechanical engineering. I love doing things with my own hands. And of course, software was something that I'd really, even in the US, and I spent a lot of time on. In ARI, we built India's first electronic data acquisition system that actually measured temperature and pressure in the cylinder of a car when the engine was running. So at temperatures of, many, like thousands of degrees centigrade, you put a sensor and you actually measure the temperature in real time. All that system for R&D in India, they were all imported at that time. We built the first one in India, completely in Pune, in ARI. So again, I got a lot of experience looking at a problem and figuring out how software can solve it. So this happened, and I think I worked in ARI for 3 years, and I went to the US again. That was the dot-com boom. That was the time where you could walk into a startup and you could get a Porsche as a sign-up bonus because it was booming. Like money was everywhere. The Bay Area was completely transformed. It was a different energy, right? You have to live it to feel the energy. And this was the first time it was happening, right? The dot-com boom was like when the internet age, the device age, and everything came together at the same time, right? And it was so much fun. I was working in a startup in Mountain View, I still remember, who did VRML, virtual reality modeling language, which was probably too early. So obviously, it died and so on, and the dot-com boom burst. But it was phenomenal learning experience. right? It was fascinating to see what people were doing, what they were building, how they were getting money, how much money was there. It was crazy. It's a different world. So anyway, I had a lot of fun. I spent about a year, roughly, kind of working right in the Silicon Valley, so to speak. Then I came back, started my own company, and then I went through the entrepreneurial journey. Anyway, so what happened was, this was 2007, when the company that I set up, the India R&D, I was not a co-founder there, but a very early employee. I joined because the CTO and the co-founder of the company was a very good friend of mine. He said, "Hey, can you start? We want engineering in India. Can you start it?" I said, "Yeah, and why not?" And I loved the value proposition. They were into server configuration management. So the company's name was BladeLogic. And 2007, we went public on the NASDAQ. So it was fun, that whole process. 2008, it got acquired by BMC Software. And I met Samir in that 1 year after we went public, maybe a couple of years before that. My co-founder in my first company went to school with Samir. That's how I know Samir. And he used to come sit in our office to meet with my co-founder, and I used to talk to him. So we knew each other. And then Serendipity, his company was also acquired at the same time by Mindtree. So we got to talking. I said, both of us did not want to, kind of be part of such a large company. Wanted to start something on our own. But this was my first startup. This was so seventh startup, but my first startup where Samir and my conversation was not about product, not about revenue, not about what we will build. Our first conversation, I still remember, in one of the coffee shops in Pune was, how do we build a consequential company? There's not too many consequential product companies, software companies have come out of Pune, and India, of course, except services companies like, obviously Infosys and Wipro and Cognizant, all of them were there, TCS. And we said, hey, how do we build a consequential company?
What do you mean by consequential company, sir?
So interesting. So if you think about a company and how long it lives, a lot of founders, including Samir and I, you always think about, hey, I'll do this and I'll get to this level. I would aspire to get to this level and I'll probably sell the company or I'll do something and build it. And then your dream probably ends at 20, 30, 40, 50 million when you're starting, right? We thought, if we could actually build a company that would last and last and last.
An institution.
An institution gives it a little bit of a formal thing.
Okay.
I would say yes. I think, the idea, kind of the word resonates, but more substantial, that would have enduring value, that wouldn't look at one use case and say, okay, I'll finish the use case and I'm done. How would I actually grow and become consequential, become there, remain there even if Samir and I were not there? That was the thought process, right? So it's very interesting because the thought process was different. Then what happened was, so we came together, we started Icertis. We did a lot of things when we started because we did not have a product idea. We were searching for a product idea. We knew we wanted to build a product, we didn't know what. But then, again, serendipity. At that time, AWS was just getting popular with the startup ecosystem. Lots of good publicity, things, about the cloud were just, some stories were coming out. And Samir, because of his Microsoft connections, because he was in Seattle, he'd also heard that Microsoft was also investing a lot on the cloud platform per se. And at that time in Microsoft internally, there was a project called Red Dog, which later became Azure. And so he said, Monish, we should do something in the cloud. Whatever we build, we should build in the cloud. And I said, too early because we don't know what to build, but why don't I start building a platform on which we can build apps? So that's how the first lines of code were written in Icertis for a platform that we could build an app on. And eventually we built a few apps on top. We were reasonably successful. But then, I told you the story of the Microsoft, my friend of Samir is calling up and saying, hey, can you build CLM for us? And That's how we got into CLM. So we use that platform, we call it the Applied Cloud Framework, to build a CLM application that Microsoft wanted to their specs to a certain extent, but keeping in mind that we could actually scale this up, right, for other customers. So that's how we got our first customer. It was interesting. First customer was Microsoft. Very few companies actually get a customer like that at that scale. It was a worldwide deployment, so all employees of Microsoft and contracting people who had to create an NDA could use it. So we tested it for 100,000 users. It was global, so we had to do it in 60, 70 different languages across 40 different subsidiaries, worldwide subsidiaries of Microsoft. So it was an enterprise app right from the word go. So we got the deployment was very successful. Microsoft being Microsoft, they love partners. So they helped us, they took us to other companies, they gave us references. And as it happened, we got a few enterprise customers. And we were lucky. 3 of them were Fortune 50, including Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson. And so we suddenly had like a tiny company, we suddenly had like large customers. So we said, okay, now there's an interesting story. I was playing golf with Samir and a friend of his in Bellevue and Seattle. And his friend asked us, how are you doing? How's Icertis doing? And so Samir and I told him, we have these customers now and we're doing CLM as well. Plus we are doing these 3-4 other apps that we built. And I said, you guys are idiots. If you have like such big customers in one app, forget about everything else. Just focus on this one thing, right? Don't dilute yourself, so to speak. So we took his advice, went back. We said, okay, let's raise some money, see if there's interest. That's how we got our first round of funding in 2015. Right? Greycroft invested in us, and so did Fidelity/8 Roads from India. So that's how we started. So that's how we got into CLM seriously.
2 interesting things that we want to, dive deeper into. Number 1 is the thought process of thinking to build a consequential institution or a company. Help us understand what was the function of this thinking. Why did you want to build a consequential company? Number 1. And second thing, if a young person is thinking to do that, how should we go about the thought process? How should we think about that? If you can give some insights over there.
No, so good. So first question was easy. I think Samir and I had slightly different reasons. Okay. My reason was, I'd seen the whole Indian IT thing, right? From CSI, was very active. Computer Society of India in Pune at that time was very active, but that was the only association across India which did any technology, software related stuff. And, I was brought up professionally in that time thinking, hey, why are Indian products not there on the global scene? Not even in India, forget the global scene, right? It was all services. And my dream was always to see, if we could build a substantial, consequential product company from India. And so after the acquisition of BladeLogic, when both Samir and I had some money in our pockets and time to spend and no hurry to be successful or to make money, that was the right time to think about, hey, can you go beyond product? Can you go beyond money? Can you go beyond success only measured in money and think long term? So you have the luxury to think long term. I wouldn't advise young people to do that per se, because obviously priorities are different. You have to survive first. So survival usually for young founders, like, my first company, survival was the most important thing, right? So survival is different. So, everything revolves around survival. And that's a good thing because it gets a lot of energy, it gets a lot of focus. People are pushed to doing beyond what they seem possible, and that's how extraordinary things happen. So I wouldn't say that's how you dream, but I would say this, that when you are in survival mode, when you're, keep some time aside to think about, if you survive, what will you do? It's a very interesting thing because that kind of forces you to not take unnatural decisions under pressure. It also validates what Nassim Taleb calls, anti-fragility, right? Where you are in survival mode, you think you're going to die tomorrow. How do you take this as an opportunity to do better and to do something different? And so anti-fragility is not just survival in the face of adversity, but finding opportunity in the face of adversity. And I think that makes it very interesting. So if I had to give advice, which I hate doing, but if I had to give advice, I would say survival, of course, comes first, especially for young founders. But if you can temper it with, hey, how do I make the most out of the difficulties that I'm facing? How do I leverage the difficulties that I'm facing to convert them into advantage? Not always possible, but that thought process, the positivity that it gets, the growth mindset that it actually brings to a table is massive.
Having this thought process is a function of, full stomach. You can't do that. You can't build a consequential company with empty stomach.
Not necessarily. I wouldn't put it that way. Our stomachs are still empty.
Okay.
We are hungry, right? Both Samir and I work 18-hour days. We love what we do. Empty stomachs come with different things, right? It comes from survival. It comes from wanting to do things. It comes from wanting to change the world. If you think about all the social leaders who have brought in massive social change, think about, someone who is trying to, change the behavior of people, traffic, or trying to figure out, how to stop farmer suicides. Try to think about these changes. If I have to go and work on the ground, you get a lot more opposition than you have ever seen in your life. You get a lot of difficulties. You run out of money. You run out of patience. You get frustrated. The government sometimes helps you, sometimes doesn't. The people sometimes help you, sometimes don't. The people you want to help sometimes are with you, sometimes they are not, right? Now, something inner, that hunger has to be inside you to actually keep doing day in, day out the same thing to kind of get to that change. That's not easy. That's exactly what, a company has to do and founders have to do. So that hunger comes from many different things. So consequential companies, of course, are built. I'm sure like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs built consequential companies because that hunger was there. Bill Gates was already rich. His mother was a director, lots of wealth and so on and so forth. Even though he was a college dropout, that way, money-wise, his stomach was full. The hunger was still there, right?
The turning point comes when a small company suddenly gets a big corporation like Microsoft. Achanak, it's just Microsoft type, and it's a global contract. You tested with 100,000
users.
How can I be a small company and get a... This is the question. This is the problem statement, which happened with you. What should we do?
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting question. But think about it this way. You need serendipity. You need things to come together to succeed in life. But you can't wait for serendipity. You have to keep trying. Remember, this happened after 3 years. We had been trying all sorts of stuff for 3 years. So the journey was not like, we started and then we got the Microsoft contract. No, there was a lot of hard work. There was a lot of pain that we went through. I remember Samir and I used to go roam the Microsoft offices, just building connections, trying to figure out, what we wanted. We were doing some services as well for Microsoft at that time. So we did a lot of stuff with no ego. We did a lot of work. I wrote code, Samir tested. We hired people. We put our own money in. Lots of, obviously you could say, hey, you had money, so you put it in. But the same thing, if we didn't have money, we would have run and found people who would have put money in our business. But it is actually that hunger that drives you, right? And then serendipity has to happen. So there are lots of people, including very close friends, who have been working very hard in life and not succeeded the way, you could potentially say we succeeded at that level. But it's not just about money. It's also about the journey, right? And luck plays a part. You can't avoid it. It has to happen. But you can't really make your own luck. I'm not a big believer of that. But you have to, put all of your energies in one place. You have to concentrate, focus for serendipity to happen. Serendipity doesn't happen without effort. Luck doesn't happen without effort. So all this, I think, is not luck and not just hard work. It's a combination. Both have to come together. And I'm very grateful it came together in Icertis. And, there's several examples. I remember our first fundraise was very interesting. We already had a term sheet.
Okay.
And there was this gentleman who had been the CFO of Microsoft and the CIO of Microsoft, who had started his own VC firm. And he wanted, we were interested, so Samir met him for coffee on Friday. And they were talking about it. And Samir said, hey, we already have a term sheet, so you'll have to make a decision very quickly. Like, I need an answer by Monday. And I said, no way, just the weekend in between, I cannot go back and think about this and take a decision and talk to other partners. Not happening. And Samir said, it's okay, we'll think about it in the next round. And so so they departed and went back. And as it happened, this gentleman flew down to somewhere in Texas, if I remember right, somewhere out of Seattle, out of Washington. And he was visiting some company. And he sees someone walk out of the restroom with the Icertis bag on his shoulder. He looks at Icertis. And
Looks familiar.
no, and he thought, hey, this is serendipity. So he didn't even talk to the person. I knew who the person was, our sales leader. But he didn't even talk to the person. He said, oh, there's a name, there's serendipity here. I talked to Samir, and then right across the country, and we were very tiny at that time, with like 50 people, maybe 5 people in the US. What's the chance of one of the 5 people in the US being, 2,000 miles away in some customer restroom, right? So anyway, he looked at that name and he said serendipity. He called Samir. He said, hey, I talked to my partners. Everything's done. Here's the term sheet. That's a story, is very interesting. So serendipity comes in many forms, right? But then you have to try, of course. So, we worked hard. And we got a great team. They work hard. And, so it's all about, getting this together. And then I think the pivotal moment for us, when we said, if you want to build a consequential company, you have to have very strong culture and values and purpose. And I think that was the second thing, because this all kind of, serendipity is good, but how do you kind of
Leverage that serendipity.
leverage it and also root yourself and not go crazy and build your business in a way that is sustainable? Because you can always take shortcuts and build a business, but shortcuts don't make for a sustainable, consequential business, usually, right? Very rare. Sometimes you can. Sometimes, you'll always find kind of companies who have been built like that, but they soon have to stop doing that. And we said, no cutting corners. We don't want to take shortcuts right at the beginning. And that has helped, right? So the culture, the values have been super important. And 2015 was the time where we actually, earlier than that, maybe 2014, 2013 was the time when we put all our values that we believed in, that we had talked about over the years, into this one word called FORTE, which stands for fairness, openness, respect, teamwork, and execution. And we said, all Icertians have to believe in FORTE. That's a non-negotiable thing, including starting with us. And that's worked.
So if I take a step back, so you have been one of the pioneers in the world of legal tech, because as we know that the field of legal and law is very conservative in nature. People, most of them, they tend to do things by themselves. They trust lawyers or the people specially trained for it to do the job rather than technology. So how do you see the world of legal tech, changing? Because as we have seen in the recent times, We have justices vouching for introduction of technology, and we have seen introduction of AI application in arguments in Supreme Court. So with what you have started, which is back 10 years ago, with what you have started and where you are headed to, how do you see the world of legal tech changing, and especially in the case of India, because it's a very smaller market? So how do you see the growth journey of legal tech in India?
That's a very broad question. First of all, we don't think of ourselves as a legal tech company. We actually don't even sell to lawyers, right? The general counsel is usually a big influencer, but not necessarily a buyer. Our buyer is the CFO, the chief compliance officer, the chief procurement officer, the chief sales officer, functional folks, business folks who really want to run their business so that they can do one or more of these three things. One is save money or stop revenue leakage, which is also saving money. The second one is to reduce risk. And the third one is to increase compliance. That's what they care about, right? And that's why they use Icertis. So for us, we have never been a legal tech company, right? So we don't, for example, give any clauses, any suggestions, anything that says, okay, you should form this clause in such a way to get, reduce your risk like this. We say it's your job, it's not ours. You tell us, but we'll make sure that the process of putting together the contract, the process of negotiation, the process of what we call intent realization, right? What happens in the contract, what you wrote in the contract, what you mean in the contract is actually happening on the ground. And how you manage your obligations, right? We help with that. We don't really go into the legal tech. We don't go into matter management. We don't go into case law. We don't go into anything else. Now, if you look at the funding, if you look at all the hype that's going in, especially with GenAI, you'll see literally hundreds of companies in legal tech trying to transform how a contract is written legally or evaluated legally, right? Now, that is very interesting because the LLMs have actually made all of this commodity. Right? It was very interesting. If I ask the LLM today, and you can try it out, you go to ChatGPT and you say, hey, can you draft me a termination clause for the airline industry where I want to buy 100 planes? With this kind of prompt, it will actually suggest a clause for you. Because it's seen all this stuff before, and people tweeting documents, Facebook, encyclopedias, Wikipedia. They've seen all of this. So it's actually very interesting that the LLM has commoditized and will commoditize more.
How accurate it is at this stage?
Depends on what you're looking for. If you really want 100 planes, you're thinking of that, you wouldn't take that. You would have 5 lawyers, highly paid, look at that clause, right? But it's getting there. So what is interesting is at least you have a first draft. So now, what used to take 3 weeks probably takes you 3 days. What used to take 3 days probably take you 3 hours. So huge savings in cost, time, turnaround times, which is very essential to an agile business, right? So if you think about India, for example, right? Here's very interesting. Indian law is extremely good. Like if you look at some of the laws, very, very robust, very, very kind of detailed. Implementation of the law is a completely different story. Very hard.
Unlike US.
Unlike the US, in the US, you usually don't want to wait 40 years for a settlement or a judgment, right? In India, because of the volume, because of the system, because of whatever reasons, it is very hard sometimes to kind of get to court. I remember when we got our first telephone at home, the wait for getting a telephone at home was about 8 years. You wanted to buy a scooter, Bajaj scooter, you had to wait for 5 years. Then came like the phones, the cell phones, and they just jumped. Like we went far ahead of the US and Europe because we just jumped. We jumped from antiquated wireline equipment to completely wireless, like almost overnight, right? I think that is where my guess is the LLMs are going to do for us. We are in that very hard scale, log nahi hai, education, all of that. And now there comes this technology that can actually transform how you do some basic stuff, how you do reasoning, how do you, take all this, 500 documents that people have piled on your desk. How do you go through them? How do you summarize? And then your decision making. So now, when it comes to the justice system, the legal system, when it comes to corporate, I think just that potential of that technology is mind-boggling. And I think that's where the real impact of technology is going to be in India. I think we'll be able to leapfrog. We have to do a lot of things right. Like in the cell phone age, we did a lot of things right. Really. Getting the right people, getting the right subsidies, getting the right environment for them to do business was all important, right? Without that, this wouldn't have happened. Same thing with AI. I think we have to take this technology and we have to embrace it in a responsible way, but then apply it to just leapfrog from where we are to where we want to go. And I think that's the potential. And hopefully it will happen, right?
So there are two interesting things. So while we young folks, we look for ideas, right? We tend to see what's happening in the US and then try to replicate. But there is an interesting aspect that you mentioned that in a lot of things in India, there has been this leapfrogging. So for example, whether you take retail, so how the retail system has evolved over in US, in India, there has been a jump, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Same thing with technology, right? WhatsApp messages. शायद वहाँ पर यूएस में आज भी वो WhatsApp उतना इस्तेमाल नहीं करते.
हाँ, text होता है ज़्यादा. Text messages, WhatsApp इतना नहीं होता है. Exactly.
Same चीज हमने यहाँ.
You can't do Dunzo there, or stuff is.
This is crazy. So what are certain things that you think India will leapfrog? Because you are building from India, selling to the States. If you have to, in the sense, predict future 10 years down the line in a couple of things, how do you see that? So that we can try to reverse engineer and think more about it.
Yeah, so very interesting. So if you think about it, even the retail revolution, right? Even the Zomatos and the Swiggis of the world, you took something that was working in the US and you replicated it here and became successful. Flipkart, right? Redbus. Take examples and you'll see, hey, there's a good replication story here. You take something that works in the US, replicate it in scale in India, make sure you're localized, right? Even Uber and Ola is a great story, right? Even with competition from something like Uber, Ola has actually done very, very well. So lots of these, right? Oyo, lots of examples. Nothing wrong in copying and replication. Perfect model, because something is working, you build it for the country and you take on. I think the next phase in my mind is going to be where people are going to say, and young founders are going to say, hey, we've replicated enough. What can we build for the world from scratch? And to do that, two things need to happen. Samir said this very well a long time ago for me. Is that you either have to create a wave or ride a wave to be successful, right? So create an internet wave. You can be a successful internet company, maybe. Ride the internet wave at the right point with the right tailwind behind you or the right surfboard, and you can do very well. But you have to either create a wave or ride a wave. We didn't create a wave. We rode the internet wave. We rode the cloud wave. Not internet, the cloud wave more specifically. And now we are riding the Gen AI wave, specifically Gen AI. I think India has this now very interesting thing where founders can think about applications of Gen AI for the world and solve problems that people have not solved before. This happens maybe once a century in the history of a country. It's very interesting to see, if you think about the industrial revolution that happened in England at that time, there was a lot of anti-sentiment as well, but there was a lot of progress that England made just because they could produce, fabric and they could produce parts and mechanical engineering components much faster because all automation actually happened and it just became a wave. You can see like the internet wave, you can see the cloud wave. Once it comes in, there are companies that can actually prosper and become massive giants, right? Facebook is an example. Uber is an example in the consumer kind of tech. Kind of I call it the lease not buy tech, right? Where you don't want to buy a car. My kids don't want to buy a car. They don't want to own a house. They just want to lease and use Airbnb. So all of this there's a cultural, social, technology wave that kind of brings it together to make successful businesses. I think India is in that cusp. 10 years from now, you'll see a lot more companies coming from India where the solution of the problem is not for a problem that exists in India, but the solution is for a problem that exists elsewhere in the world or even globally, right? Which is very interesting. That's one part of it. That is how I think, because we have a large English speaking population, we have a large tech savvy, IT savvy population, and we have a young population. I think you'll see a lot of that. But there's another aspect which I'm very bullish about, and I don't know if it'll pan. I think, if you go back when I was in college, there used to be every other week there used to be a big article in the newspapers, and it would say the brain drain, right? The headlines would be the brain drain. We spend, and there would be calculations. We spend 1 lakh rupees
On IITs
and all these people are going out, and nothing is coming back to India. And after that, you go 20 years, the people who went, became really big execs in these large US and European companies. And they said, okay, I have a business problem. I know these people in India can do this because we have, good colleges and we have people who speak English. Let's outsource. That's how the whole IT revolution actually worked. If we had not had the brain drain, this would never have worked. So now it's interesting for us. A lot of people now either don't want to go out of the country or they want to come back to the country. Now, 10 years from now, this is going to be a phenomenal asset for us. People who are smart, who have stayed back as opposed to go back. So the Satya Nadellas and the Sundar Pichais and the Shantanus of the world and the Lakshmans of the world, they are all going to be in India, building in India and thinking about entrepreneurship from India. Now, no technology can match that kind of power, right? Obviously, a lot of things, serendipity also has to come together. The environment has to come together. Support from the government, from the people, from colleges, everything has to come. Infrastructure, has to come together. But you can do a lot of stuff from a small city now, from a small town, from Nagpur. Connectivity is not a problem. You don't have to stay in Bangalore or Hyderabad or Pune or Noida. You can actually be an entrepreneur sitting in Kochi or Nasik or Nagpur. And that, I think, is going to bring a big revolution that nobody's ever seen before. Fingers crossed.
I completely again, this small idea of, dollar revenue rupee cost. It is something that excites me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We want to build products for the world from India. But it requires understanding of how the US or the foreign market works, right? The same thing that you're doing. With my limited understanding, 80% of the revenues are coming from the foreign markets, right? For Icertis. Yeah. How can I have that understanding of the US market being based out of in India? How do you do that? Because in Icertis, you also can't replicate the same products that you are, selling to US,
right,
to Indian customers. How can we do that, sir?
So for us, it was very easy because Samir was there,
Right.
So he knew the market there. So it was easy. But that's exactly my point. My point was that a lot of people will come back and a lot of people will not want to go out. Now, that actually brings a very interesting thing. There'll be a lot of people who come back who have already had the experience of seeing those markets closely and getting experience from those markets, bringing it again here. The other big thing which people, including me, haven't seen enough of, the potential. but there is a lot of potential. Is all of these multinationals who are already established here, right? What do you think the head and the next 50 people in the command chain of a multinational, what do they call it, GCOs? GCCs. Look at the top 50 people in that GCC who is learning so much from the inside of a business that's global. All that expertise is remaining in India. It's not going out. All of that capability is actually becoming foundational to getting an environment where these startups and these founders can really prosper. They don't need to go move their base to the US. They don't need a co-founder in the US anymore. They have all these people with all this information, behind the scenes information, how to run the business, how to be successful, what goes wrong, right? What not to do. All of this intense learning for years and years sitting in India, right? And I think that's a huge value. That's what will, in my mind, will feed this, right? That's where the expertise will come from, right? For us also, you think about it, even my early startups, when you're a young founder, you always have advisors. You always have mentors, right? Now you have a pool of mentors that you can go to, which are really accomplished, who've seen the world, and they're right here. Yeah, you don't have to do a 10 p.m. call. You can actually go meet them and spend 4 hours every day, right? It's amazing what this transformation can bring.
So Monish, I was very curious as you're talking about your journey. You've spoken very eloquently about the business. Would love to learn more about you. Like, what is what makes you, what keeps you occupied besides work, and what are some of your interests? Because personally, I feel that although we have this notion in India where passion is seen as something which is distracting, but I feel that in the journey, it's a serendipity. Many times your passion sort of fuels, towards your professional life. So has there been instances where you feel that your personal goals or personal hobbies have sort of helped you in your professional journey?
Being an entrepreneur is hard, right? In many ways. It's also very fulfilling, but it's also very hard. It takes a toll in terms of time. It takes a toll in terms of responsibilities, stress, and so on. I think I love reading and I love gaming. So these two.
Still play Call of Duty with your stuff?
Oh yeah. And not my son. He's too good. So I keep away from him. So he hates playing with me. Though he usually he'll show me a few new moves and go away, but not really. He's really, really good. I'm not that good. But like, Call of Duty, Flight Simulator, things that I can, when I don't want to kill people virtually, I'll go fly a plane, right? Much relaxing and less stressful. So that's an out for all the, pent up stress and energy that helps in the business. I think it also provides a way to think about, bad times, how to get out of them, and, how to get 9 lives, right? How do you get health packs? Get yourself, pick yourself up and, go fight the battle again. Sometimes very bad metaphors, but they work for me individually, so that's fine. But it's that thing that actually makes it interesting. The hobbies definitely work. The gaming definitely works there. I think books have been like, and I'm glad my daughter is also like that. My son reads, but not as much. But my daughter and I are voracious readers. Like I most of it is fiction. Like 95% of what I read is fiction, but I read like crazy. And she reads everything, including nonfiction, more nonfiction than fiction. But books give you a very different perspective. And I think you think differently, you react differently. I think one of the things, I did my master's in the US and then I came back. But I picked up a lot of, how to behave with people from books, from fiction, right? Just reading, all sorts of stuff, right? Including Wilbur Smith and Desmond Bagley and James Hadley Chase.
Yeah.
So P.G. Woodhouse. So there's a whole thing there in books, in that world of books that actually helps you in life. And everyone has their own, right? Not everybody likes to read, but I love to. I hate inspirational books sometimes, somehow. But so once in a while, I'll do like Satya, and I'll do a couple of people. I'll take the time to read, but otherwise, I just cannot. Not that I don't like the stories. I love the stories. I don't have the patience.
So which is your favorite recommended book that you would say that we should definitely read in fiction?
Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Then it followed by The Messiah, which is very good. Same author. But it's a small book, very inspirational, very motivating. This kind of hunger, intense hunger for excellence. There's a seagull who tries to fly much better than others. Beautiful. So highly recommended reading because it's only 15 minutes or maybe an hour of your time, but very inspirational. You don't like it, you can forget about it very easily because it's so small. But I've always loved it. Always loved it.
Ideas, coming to an idea and sticking to it for a long term, is a different thing. But we will do the hard work of actually going to the market, understanding, and then coming to the idea part. But because you are at the top of this field and you're seeing things, help us understand what are some clear-cut white spaces, or even which are not white spaces right now, but you think in future this is going to be big. Are there some problem statements that you see that young people, there will be around 10,000, 15,000 people who will be watching this, right? That they can, think or start looking. So the question is there any product or service that you really, really want, but in your life or your business, but you're not able to get it? So if somebody provides that, you'll just pay him right away.
Very interesting. So all the ideas are taken. Lots of people come to me and say, Monish, I've thought about this idea. And I say, okay, search. But, there's a mobile app here, or there's an application there, or there's a startup in Europe, or there's a startup in the US. So I think it's in this world, it's very hard to come up with new ideas. And there are always white spaces. I'm not saying no. There's always a problem that is remained to be solved properly. I think the more important thing in my mind is if you go looking for white spaces, you can be successful in finding a white space and make it really, really big. But your chances increase if you go look for an opportunity to partner with a customer, with a person, with somebody who understands. Oh, there is a problem here that I would like to solve. Like you asked me, right? Monish, what would you pay to solve a problem that you have today? I have a problem today. I use this whole, kind of unstructured search. I would love to do all that unstructured search in the database. I could pay $1 million to a startup who could solve that problem. I'll always have 2 or 3 problems like that, right? Every company in the world, every leader in the world will have 2 or 3 problems that they want to solve, right? But are they white spaces? You don't know yet. Right? So I would say if you can actually channel your energies in finding someone who can validate and say, here's my problem. Like, I really am grateful that we started on the CLM journey because Microsoft asked us to. Very grateful about that. We didn't think about CLM. We didn't think about a product idea. We didn't think about the white space. We said, hey, our conversation was, if Microsoft is going to be our first customer, let's build it. Let's not even look at product market fit and all of the things that वो देखते फिर देखते क्या करना है, right? And then we got into it. The other thing is, when you go deep into a problem, you need to find ways of differentiating yourself. Why are you different, right? And not all founders, and I've made that mistake before, actually focus a lot on that. Because if your story is like any other story, then it's very hard for people to give you money. Because you're already small, it's very difficult to bet on you. So now you have to find someone to bet on you without a differentiator, which is almost impossible, very hard. So now, how do you make yourself different, your story different? How do you make sure, you have the ability to carry that story and so on? There are exceptions, but I'm not an expert because I've never done this before. B2C is definitely a different ballgame, right? So B2B is very different, which I've been doing all my life. I have no expertise or experience in B2C. But B2C can be something where you think about something and it actually, you can bring it to life. But it's also an incredibly difficult endeavor, right? Because it just needs a lot of things to come together, including usually a lot of money. But that's what I would say, right? It's an interesting thing to put together.
It's like cutting it short. It's a huge question, but try to give us some things up. You're a CTO, right? If you have to train a young CTO, what are some mistakes that you did as the technology brain of this company that you would, advise a 22-year-old version, who's a CTO in making?
I wouldn't give him any advice. I wouldn't even try to train him or her. I would leave them to do what they do best and what they're motivated with. I think what I would do is share some of my experiences probably, just to get them grounded in terms of how to think about this. Not advice, but at least, think about this. I think one thing I would say is, and because I've made these mistakes before, is that you don't build for perfection. So don't be a perfectionist CTO. It's very hard for the business, right? So you build a tool which works. And that is important because companies go through phases, especially startups go through phases. So whatever you build and whatever you do and wherever you put your energies in, you have very limited amount of resources, including your own time and energy, right? So you have to be pragmatic. You have to understand the business. You can't say, I'm the technology person. That doesn't work. You have to understand the business. And I think I've made those mistakes before, and I would never make them again. Because if I don't understand the business, then I cannot build something that can be successful, for sure. And the other thing I would say is, technology is always cool, and you always want to build on what is new. But at least in enterprise software, you probably want to be a year and a half behind, right? Because usually it takes that long to get something in the hands of customers in enterprise because of the sales cycles, because of the implementation. It's a little bit longer, especially in our business. And so, you want to make sure that you are at the cutting edge, but at the same time, you have to be pragmatic about, when your customers are going to use it. So when we started on our Gen AI journey, we said, hey, what will customers expect a year down the line, not now? And that helped quite a bit. Hugely, right?
It's like predicting future.
It's a little bit like, I would say, yeah, you brought a smile to my face. Not predicting the future, but predicting your customer behavior, which is different. So I was not predicting what would happen with Gen AI and, OpenAI and Microsoft would do this and do that. I was thinking, how would my customers' habits change a year down the line with all the Gen AI revolution that they are seeing around them? Which is a very different way of thinking than to think about, Gen AI will do this. Yeah. Because that is very hard to predict, right? And you can't build products based on predictions. So now, because you don't have the technology sometimes, right? You don't have that GPT-4o model. What were you going to do for 1 year before? So we said, hey, don't worry about LLM and accuracy and cost and speed. It is all going to get fixed. We made that assumption. Because obviously there are billions of dollars going in there. It's going to be fixed. It's not going to be the same. So we never worried about, how much it is going to cost us. And will we make money? Of course we'll make money eventually. Not now. First 2 years, maybe very expensive first 6 months. And then look at GPT-4o, 50% of the cost of GPT-4. So, and faster, right? Better, multimodal. So things move very quickly in this, and you can bet on that. But you can't bet on what will happen. That is hard.
Here's the interesting part in the last section, sir. We'll ask you some questions. You have to answer in one word, one sentence.
Okay.
Very quick ones.
Okay. Rapid fire.
Yes.
All right.
Tell us one thing that you don't agree with Elon Musk and Sam Altman, because you said that.
Both of them together.
Maybe different.
Different. Okay. So
Together we try.
I don't think AI is going to be bad for humanity. I'm 100% sure of that. It's like, nuclear power nuclear fission was going to be bad. The world never ended. It came close, never ended. So that for sure. I think, Sam, I don't think I disagree. I think he's generally a very calm, reasonable person. He does think, this is going to be scary and so on and so forth. But he's warning. He's not saying, AI will take over the world and it's very bad. So I think Elon Musk goes that way. I don't believe that. I don't agree with that, I would say. But Sam has generally been, the voice of reason in my mind, right? Of course, you have to be careful. It's a very, very dangerous technology. You have to be careful. And then everybody's seen Terminator. So you have to be careful. Of course, it's not technology that should be taken lightly. And it'll have its effects, and there'll be bad actors who will take the technology and use it for bad things. So you have to be worried about all of that.
One thing you often find yourself, saying or teaching to your kids. Very often.
Oh my goodness. Shut up. Not, that is hard. Saying but not teaching.
Teaching.
Teaching. Oh, saying. I thought saying to your kid but not teaching.
Need saying or / teaching.
Okay.
Often find yourself teaching them.
Oh, okay. Read. I think that I've always encouraged my kids. Now they don't listen to me, of course, they're grown up. But when they did at least attempt to listen, I would say read. Read books, read things, be curious.
One prediction that you have about the consumer behavior, once you think after 5 years down the lane, when AI use cases or applications of AI will become pervasive in our lives, how do you think the human behavior would change?
I think everybody will become more creative. So we're set up for that now, very nicely. Everybody will become an artist, a painter, a poet, sculptor, especially when the physical worlds and the virtual world come together, which it is kind of now slowly moving. I think that creativity in humans will just come to the fore. You'll see all kinds of manifestations there.
You've done parasailing and skydiving, sir. Suggest us the best place to go for it.
So my favorite for skydiving is a place called Pepperell on the east coast of the US. Very beautiful. I've done skydiving in the Bay Area, which is also very nice if you pick the right seasons.
Seasons. What's that? Which is the right season?
So when it's green and it's a little bit of rain. Otherwise, California has had drought for a long time. Now, last 1 or 2 years, it's been better. But you have to choose. Then it becomes really beautiful.
How did you learn golf?
I don't know. I just went and played golf because one of my friends came from the US and said, "What? You don't play golf? Let me take you." So that's how it happened. I'm a terrible golfer. Now I don't have the time, I guess, or because I don't have the intent, I guess, that motivation now. So I don't play as much.
Best flight simulator game that you played?
Oh, Microsoft Flight Simulator. I think the first one was launched in 1977 or something. I've had all editions. Wonderful.
We have so many questions, but we want to respect your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir. It was super insightful and a lot of things that we need to go back and think.